Maybe I can start with that thing I read to you right before Ray came.
You want me to put this in the background while Mañanitas Synarchistas? Want that playing in the background?
We'll get there.
Okay. What kind of music do you want, though? I mean, I've got Por mi patria, mi Dios y bandera. I've got here. You like Fe Sangre Victoria, right? That's your favorite. Blood, fucking faith, blood, and victory.
I like the more modern norteño one I sent as well.
Oh, I get it.
Soldado Synarquista.
All right. Well, why don't you? Yes. Why don't you give us a reading then, huh?
It's so hard with this in the back.
You can't concentrate.
Here in Mexico, rather than in Argentina or Bolivia, is the ideal refuge for where the fascist idea, defeated and exterminated in Europe, may live and thrive.
All right, I'm assuming. Yes. We don't have any tequila, do we?
We do actually. We have some mezcal.
Do we have a fair amount of it to
We could have
break it out?
Yeah.
I think we should.
Okay.
This is a rare occasion for us.
Yeah. To drink in the honor of Mexican fascism.
Yes. I've never done that before. I didn't even know I could. We're all going to be shirtless before the end of this episode. All right. This episode's going to be chaos. Stand up like men!
What is that? Like a totally different vibe, though. Oh, you have to have him saying free holy.
Free holy. Free holy.
All right.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Welcome to The Empire Never Ended with Boris, Fritz, and Ray.
You.
Hey.
Bienvenidos, boys.
Are you going to be doing that the whole episode?
I am. I'm going to make casual Spanish references just to remind people that I'm a man of the world, or El Mundo.
And you're from Texas.
Yes, I am.
Tejas.
Tejas, yeah.
Which means you speak perfect Spanish.
No, actually, Tejas means friendship in the Caddo people's language, according to what I learned in elementary school. Lots of stories about friendship there with different races, peoples.
Yeah. We'll be going to Texas today.
Hey, all right.
Free holy.
Nice. Nice.
Jesus Christ. And we'll be doing, we'll be talking a little bit about the fifth column.
Okay.
Nice. Great.
That's a term we're familiar with on this show, no?
Yeah. I mean, not, with the word Mexico in it, but.
Yeah. And this is actually perhaps the only Fasci Cathy episode that you're not doing.
What's going on? You're right. Ray's
something
out there
wrong
doing
with
like ruling class studies with scientific institutions. You're over here doing Fasci Cathys. What the fuck am I going to do? I've got to go study some black hand shit, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you did Ustash episodes before.
That is
you
true.
Opened it up,
yeah.
actually.
And you know what?
You
This
did.
is, okay, so there are some similarities here, I think. This is an emigre Fasci Catholic group.
Brings it all together.
And it has that rare distinction of having that label kind of bring them down a little bit. That lead. They were kind of irreparably damaged by being fascists. Or
By being emigre fascists in the U.S.?
In the U.S., yeah.
And they were brought down because of that. This is an unusual story.
This is an unusual story, right? No, it's
Were they brought
surprising.
down because of that or because they were Mexicans?
Well, that's the question.
Okay.
I think we're going to get into that in a little bit.
I feel like we might have an answer locked and loaded for that one. But let's wait. Let's wait and see.
There's a high probability that it's
Could be a
it's the
surprise.
Mexican thing. But it's really a combination of factors. But we'll get to that here in a little bit. The group in question, of course, is the Mexican Unión Nacional Synarquista,
All right.
and its branch in the USA. To be careful not to say America in these Latin American episodes. People get upset by that.
But wait. But wait, wouldn't now be the time to do that?
To upset.
No, to say America, because we're talking about not just the United States, right?
Well, I am talking about specifically the US.
So this is really a thing that you did then. That's what you're
Yes.
saying.
So you're talking about Mexican Synarchist in the US.
Yes.
All right.
Because they were like a significant force in Mexico since its founding in the late 1930s. But it did have a considerable membership in the US as well. Yeah, so like most fasci emigre groups that we've talked about, they're mostly concerned with politics and social issues in the old country more than the US.
Sure.
The old country being Mexico. But they also have some kind of a Spanish connection?
But
or-
wait, but the U.S. wasn't the old country. Like, oh yeah, like most of the U.S. was
parts-
old country Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an issue. I mean, not actually as big of an issue as you might imagine
They're
for
not
them.
into the Reconquista. Reconquista. Sorry, I'm so used to saying it like our Ukrainian friends. Yeah.
No, but I mean, it will be focused on the U.S. because I think if talking about Synarchismo in Mexico, where it was like a huge political force at the time and stayed for a little bit longer as well than it did in the U.S., is kind of beyond the scope of our capabilities now. And, this is an arc focused on the U.S. But, it's interesting because I read about Synarchismo like a long time ago. It was actually like the name was interesting to me. And we'll talk about the name here in a minute. But I remember being like, oh yeah, I wonder, if there were any Mexicans in America that were into this. And I remember looking up some of these articles that I'm going to talk about later in the episode. And I was like, holy shit, there were fucking 70,000 members in California. Like,
God
that's
damn.
fucking crazy.
Yeah.
And then like looking it up, and I'm like, damn, like they got a lot of media attention in the 40s during World War II. And so it was kind of surprising to me that it's largely forgotten about today. Like we talk about the Bunds, we talk about, to some extent, even the Italian American fascist presence is well known, but this one isn't so much. And
Did they have a special color for their shirts?
no, so there were actual like other fascist groups in Mexico that were like called themselves explicitly fascists who did have these guys had uniforms too, but like they had I forget which Mexican fascist party it was by name off the top of my head, but they had gold shirts and black pants.
Okay.
But those groups didn't last as long as the Synarchistas, and they never had the same support. So yeah, I mean, when I decided to start looking into this, I was kind of surprised that they're overlooked by both kind of scholars of Synarchism in Mexico and like people that study the American right wing at this time. And in fact, the only extensive English language scholarly work I could find on it was this excellent doctoral dissertation by Nathan Elstrand, Reclaiming the Patria, Synarchismo in the United States, 1936 to 66, which is she, I guess, defended in 2022.
Congratulations.
So, big shout out to him as one of the main sources of this episode, along with these newspapers and some intelligence reports, because it's really, there's surprisingly little about this phenomenon. Also that number 50,000's in California is a little bit overblown.
Up, huh?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
But let's get into a little bit of the background. So without doing a deep dive on Mexican history, let's do a little short summary here.
Back in the 19th century.
Back in the 19th century. Close, early 20th century.
Okay.
So the Unión Nacional Synarquista emerged as, I guess, a continuation of Catholic reaction and resistance to the anti-clerical reforms of the Mexican Revolution. And
those are like, they were
hardcore,
really into them.
But I mean, which Catholic country didn't have
for real
a revolution that was extremely anti-clerical?
Yeah.
Or, they like shoot statues of Jesus. And like in Spain, that we talked about with Mark Bray and kind of other stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, there's lots of examples.
We were laughing about it with like the secular Portuguese Republic rising and how they portrayed them in film as like torturing children, but they did arrest some kids, like they did.
Yeah, and I mean, the Mexican Revolution had a very strong anti-clerical reason for a reason. And that's, basically the church's dominance on social, political, even economic life from colonization. Up to the revolution, right? And of course, it's how it was tied into the system of large landowners, which is true, everywhere in Latin America. Didn't exactly make them super popular with landless peasants all the time. So the Mexican Constitution of 1917 is the kind of main gripe for a lot of these people here. It instituted a strongly secular state and greatly curbed the rights of the Catholic Church in Mexico, which kind of effectively relegated them to the private sphere of life. Like, large religious celebrations in public were banned. Of course, big separation of church and state, including, for example, like not having, what's it called? The chaplains in the army. Religious education was banned. They broke up a lot of the large estates owned by the church in land reform, and people that were closely associated with the church, these landowners and the like.
They were basically crucified. Christ.
Yes. Which was popular for some people, but also not popular with others, because those that know a little bit about Mexican history will know that these reforms triggered a series of violent counter-revolutionary rebellions in the 1920s, primarily in central and western Mexico, which, pitted religious and lay people and clergy under the banner of Viva Cristo Rey against the Mexican state and, people that supported those anti-clerical reforms. And so Cristero Wars are obviously a really interesting chapter of history. I mean, again, we don't really have too much time to get into that there, but it, drew attention from all around the world, including Pope Pius XI himself, who issued some decrees about that. Interestingly, the Knights of Columbus were involved from the United States in defending Catholicism. And it's not called a war for no reason. There was quite a lot of violence as well. And for the purposes of this episode, that violence also triggered large waves of immigration to the north. Now, of course, there were large existing Mexican communities in the U.S. before the arrival of refugees, since the U.S. took a bunch of territory from Mexico. And the like. Whoops. And of course, during the Mexican Revolution, the tables were kind of turned, right? There was a lot of Mexican revolutionary activity in the U.S. Like Ricardo Flores Magón. In L.A., although they arrested him there. But, there was the whole like Mexican socialists and anarchists in the U.S. As well. And many of the Mexican American civic organizations that were more left-wing weren't really from some of these recent arrivals, and they would be some of the primary opponents of the Synarchistas in the U.S. and would do a lot of damage to them. Not long after their founding.
That's how you do it.
So since they, as I said, they were a kind of modern incarnation of this previously existing phenomenon, they were founded in 1937.
Oh, okay.
Which is a lot later than I initially thought, too.
Were they like, can you say offhand if they were mostly younger people or older people? Like, would these have been like Cristero veterans, or are these like...
I'm actually not sure what the demographic breakdown of it is here, because I think that they're... I'm not really sure.
So
because in something...
They were founded in 37 in the U.S.?
No, in Mexico.
Okay.
In the city of León in Guanajuato in central Mexico.
Okay.
And it takes its name, this weird name, from the Greek term synarchy, which means with authority, and is the opposite of anarchy, which they like explicitly saying a lot.
Synarchismo.
Yeah. Which is funny because in the Greek it's with authority. But in Spanish, sin anarquismo, which is what sometimes people also
exactly
the name to, is without anarchism. Right. So what does modern mean in 1937 for like a nationalist reactionary Catholic group? It means that it takes on a pretty well-established fascistic kind of aesthetic and structure. Mm-hmm. Right. So
yeah, we're talking peak like mass support for fascism.
37. It's exactly yeah. So
it's also let me just add that's also like the turning point for a lot of the normies. So a lot of people in 37 at that point already had to make decisions about whether or not they're going to continue supporting fascism.
Yeah,
because of they were mean to some capitalists a couple times.
Yeah, and it was becoming increasingly clear what was about to happen in the world. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, kind of time isn't really on their side in this whole story, because this is a bad time to have like a more above ground mass movement that's looks like the way they do with uniforms and the whole, marching band thing and very highly authoritarian structure and emphasis on class cooperation, this kind of thing. And of course, because of that, there's a lot of debate about whether or not it was actually fascist. Obviously it's not the same as Italian fascism or National Socialism. I mean, this is something that we see a lot with these kinds of groups, especially with clerofascist groups, right?
Yeah. But did they call themselves corporatists?
No, they didn't.
That's weird because it's like right there for them. It's like...
No, but that's because they're clerofascists. And so they follow Catholic ideas of social justice.
Well,
right, which is something that you're familiar with, Fritz, right?
Sometimes they do call that corporatism, I'll have you know.
Oh, yeah, well.
But these guys didn't really throw that word around. It wasn't like up front.
They threw social justice around for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
In the like explicitly Catholic sense.
Okay, yeah, so they're referring to this, I think it was Pius X. Let me just make sure about that. Quadragesimo anno. Quadragesimo. You must be referring to the Quadragesimo anno of Pius X.
Of course.
Right? Yeah.
My Latin's a little rusty, Fritz.
So this was an answer to socialism from the Catholic Church. It was an acknowledgement that there are problems with, we'll say, capitalism for shorthand, the modern world, the inequalities and all of that. But the answer wasn't going to be socialism. The answer was already in the church in the form of a Catholic social justice, which was basically charity and that kind of thing. But underneath all that this is the same guy who popularized the term like Christ is King that got Candace Owens fired the other day. Mm-hmm. And this is also a guy that promoted Catholic corporatism, which is probably where we got Italian corporatism from. But I think that's future studies for us. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, Pius X back again on Tenepod.
Oh yeah.
But Pius XI, I think, was also a big part. I think Pius XI carried forward this Catholic social justice thing because, again, this was like the big contribution of the time in the battle against modernism.
Right. And so this is something they explicitly follow. So, I mean, if the question is whether a group like this is fascist or not, I would say yes. Mm-hmm. Because, again, it doesn't have to be a carbon copy of National Socialism or Italian fascism. Like Coderanu's clerofascism or Usamljeni or whatever are different than National Socialism.
Sure.
Sometimes opposed to certain things in National Socialism. It doesn't really change who they are. But Synarchism is interesting in that respect because it didn't really have necessarily a militant component in the form of like a militia like most fascist movements did. Although they did have
the same for like Ljotić and his movement in Yugoslavia.
Right. Yeah. Although he would be kind of given one later because circumstances made it as such. Yeah. And this is what, maybe lends some credence to the whole fifth column thing, because there's also a debate about whether or not they were actually a fifth column because they didn't have this that kind of militia organization. But, groups like that, when they're given the chance, they kind of like having it. But they did have, for example, a really well-developed martyrdom culture. Mm-hmm. This was, in Mexico, there was violence going on. Because like I said, they were a pretty major opposition force. So, Synarchista dies, and they venerate him as a martyr, even though they're not, a militia or whatever.
Was this more of an urban movement or a rural one?
I think it had components of both, okay. Because in the class cooperation, you do sometimes see that they're like, middle class, upper middle class Mexicans, maybe even disenfranchised former landowners that are in this. But then there's also the kind of lay religious, rural people that are also into it as well. Or in the case of, when they go to the U.S., people who become like industrial laborers,
right?
In the Midwest, or proletarians. So not long after it started in Mexico, local committees spread throughout all these different Mexican states, and then also into the United States. And first in areas with larger Mexican populations like Texas, Southern California, the Southwest, but then spread upwards into areas where Mexicans were migrating, say in the Midwest, Chicago, Milwaukee, that kind of thing. And as Elstrom points out, there were previously existing groups that were very similar, that kind of set up that infrastructure, both in Mexico and the U.S. So he brought up Las Legiones, which had like an established presence, kind of predecessor to the Synarchistas, and had a presence in Texas and California, like so that a lot of those networks were already in place.
Another legion for a legion of legions.
Another legion. Our legion will come into it too, or one of our legions will come into this too. But I'll make a brief mention of them in a sec. So the Synarchista local branches took the form of these really authoritarian top-down committees, which makes sense. They're with authority.
Yes. Yeah.
Which direct local activities, mostly like distributing propaganda, like Synarchista newspapers, most of which I think were published in Mexico and then, distributed around the US. But also some books as well. There's some interesting books that were brought up. There's one, what's it called? Like Mexico in 1960, which is like some sort of fictional vision of what like Mexico could look like in 30 years.
In the year 1960.
Yeah.
All right. Damn.
Like if they had their way and restored order and to society and the church and the like.
Do they have a moon colony?
Doubtful. It would be nice. It'd be kind of cool to check that out though if I could find it. And directing cultural programs, which we'll get to a little bit later, and gathering funds for the movement back home. So this is like pretty typical stuff for most of these emigre groups that we've talked about on the show. This is pretty much what you do. Of course, they had the added advantage of living right next to their country.
Yeah.
Which would be both a plus and a minus for them in the long run. The plus is, of course, you can publish newspapers in Mexico and have them sent there. You can have the directors and authority figures from, the leaders come and visit and go to the local chapters very easily.
Yeah. Was the downside the racism of people who you would hope would be your allies, essentially?
That is definitely a major component. Okay. And then also when they get labeled as fifth columnists, you can be a fifth columnist from, I don't know, the Bund or something, but Germany's still far away.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was, the major concern here was that the fifth column was going to aid in like a Japanese or German like landing into Mexico.
Yeah. Or
that like subversive elements would destabilize from the inside, like the US. And we'll get to what that looked like later on. Ideologically, they had a 16-point program that, above all else emphasizes what you might imagine, Mexican nationalism against the forces of communism and the international or whatever internationalism. As we said, class cooperation in the form of this Catholic social justice, for a more equitable society. They acknowledged, the.
Yeah, but it's always in that way of like, it's the holy duty of the betters to care for their flocks. You know what I mean? That's
right. Because the defense of private property is big here too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm trying to, I don't remember there being a lot of revolutionary property theories and Pius X's original writing on it.
I don't know. I'm sure
I'm trying to remember what he said about the MCM relationship, but I can't. I get confused with that in the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then, of course, this society that's with authority that will obviously be pretty authoritarian, that's actually true democracy, which, does that also sound familiar? We've heard that a lot in both kind of...
They said democracy when they said that?
Yes, absolutely. And this is something that they bring up a lot.
I mean, that sentiment is common because it like fulfills the happiness and the freedom of people to be in their natural place, right? It's that inversion. But like democracy, I don't know that.
But true democracy, that might be like an American influence, U.S. influence.
It sounds a lot like Americanism. No?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that does. I mean, that does. Yeah. But I guess I'm just surprised. Yeah. Yeah, to hear it here in this context.
And in practice, like I said, they weren't like a militia group, but they were like literally counter-revolutionary in that they didn't believe that in launching a counter-revolution or any kind of revolutionary activity as you might expect it. Instead, they wanted to infiltrate like state or union organizations to kind of rid them of their bad communist, secularist influences. And then later by leading by example in a pretty interesting way that didn't really work out for them, I think, the way that they planned. And that is that they had... we've talked about botched colonization schemes on the show before. Yeah,
we will soon. Again, I think I've got some...
I mean, even like way back, what was it?
Well, Fordlandia was a classic one, right? Yeah. I'd really like to get into seasteading on this show at some point, both as a topic and as a practice. But we'll get there. Yeah, but lots of dumbass ideas about transplanting whatever.
Yeah, I mean, they decided that the best way to transform Mexico is to set up kind of a counter society that could show that that it works.
Okay,
their vision works for this ordered Catholic society.
It's also somehow like what we later see in the U.S. No, like with the Northern Imperative, what it's called,
the Northwestern Territorial Imperative.
Okay,
they picked a far less hospitable place to try to colonize, and that's like the Sonoran Desert and Baja California.
Okay, so they're going more with like the Manson family vibe.
Well,
heading out to the more the sandy grottos.
I don't think they'd appreciate that comparison. I think that it's like a nice agricultural. If they didn't dislike Jews in socialism, maybe something like a kibbutz would be kind of the vision there for like like transform the desert into like a successful agricultural cooperative that would profit from its endeavors and live their ideological dream. And they had a few such colonies. So there were many such attempts to colonize northern Mexico. It was pretty sparsely populated at the time. Parts of it still are, right? But it was very, especially Baja California, very underdeveloped in terms of like infrastructure at all. So the Mexican government had tried it. They took their inspiration from the Spanish colonizers, who also tried to do the same thing. And they emphasized the importance of like the conquistadors and bringing this, like, superior Catholic civilization to Mexico. And they very much reference that in these colonization schemes as well.
I have two comments. One is a question, actually. Would you guess that they would consider tradition in the sense of like Evola, in the sense of like the ancient hierarchy, that needs to be constantly recapitulated on Earth, that kind of sensibility? Do you think they would identify that with a European point of origin? Do they see it as specifically something that was like brought over? Would you guess? This is getting kind of way in the weeds here. But
that's way in the weeds. Yeah. But if I had to take a guess, I would say yes.
Okay.
In that they emphasize the Hispanidad thing, right?
Okay.
The Spanishness, and that like as a good thing.
Okay, right? That's interesting.
Were they monarchists?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I haven't seen anywhere that they advocated for like a monarchy in that sense. I think they had this kind of structured, like authoritarian democracy kind of thing.
My other comment was, have you ever been to a Cold Stone Creamery?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you know how they have all those toppings and they have like fucking everything? I feel like our show is kind of like a Cold Stone Creamery of fascists because like we have such a variety now. If you want a Mexican fascist kibbutz, we have it on. We have it there in the little topping thing, you know?
Yeah. You
can roll your ice cream around in it. Give it a lick. And that's Tenepod.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, they did try this in a few different colonies, and so this was happening in northern Mexico. But the American component was contributing both financially, and in one of the colonies, I think that a large portion of the colonists had crossed over from the United States. So, like, I mean, here's an example of an article about this from 1941.
Mexico to sponsor Synarchist colony. 100,000 will be offered facilities to cultivate farms in Lower California.
And they interestingly, they call their leader the Fuhrer.
The pledge, as it was ascertained today, was made by the Mexican chief executive in the course of an interview granted to Salvador Abascal, 31-year-old Fuhrer of the National Synarchist Union, which claims to have a membership of 500,000. It was understood to have been given with the stipulation that the colony will be of a non-political character. The group of 500 Synarchist colonists will leave for the peninsula by the end of November, it was said. Each colonist family will be financed to the extent of 1,000 pesos, about $200, which will come from the Synarchist coffers.
And again, so a lot of these Synarchist coffers were being filled from, laborers in the United States who were sending money back.
I love a non-political Fuhrer. You don't get a lot of those. They always have opinions.
Yeah. What's political about a fascist kibbutz?
Right. Yeah.
As you might imagine, it's not actually really easy to cultivate all your crops in the desert and start from literally nothing, right? They wanted to start their own communities, not go into a pre-existing one and build off of it. So from what I could see, it was predictably disastrous. There was some enthusiasm for it in the beginning. And, they started with small shacks and then worked their way up. But then, of course, the issue of irrigation was a problem. So a lot of the wells weren't producing enough water, as you might expect. Some of these people the settlers, the colonists there, were agricultural workers who did know how to work the land, but not this shitty desert land. And then, of course, there's the thing that happens a lot in failed colonization schemes where there's the guy from the city who's whatever, a lawyer or something. He's like, this will be great. I don't fucking know jack shit about farming.
Yes.
So there was a little bit of that. But, this is something that went on for a few years before I think it completely petered out and failed. But that was part of the idea, right? So we're going to build this shining example in the desert, and then the rest of society will figure out that we got it right.
So it was more successful than the Black Hammer project.
Yeah,
I was just thinking. I was also thinking.
Okay, but that was literally a guy, like a crazy person pocketing money.
Okay. Well, if that's our cutoff line, then I'm not going to bring up Kanye's compound either. So
the Manson family was more successful than the Black.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. But most things are most successful in Black Hammer, or a lot of other. I mean, this at least lasted a couple years, and they had several different colonies. There was a base of support for this. It just didn't really work out how they expected. It's not time yet.
Oh, damn it. Okay.
I mean, this actually is Synarchist music, no?
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's Las Mañanitas. That's, every Mexican child's birthday party.
I mean, but it's their version of it, no?
Yeah, it's their version of it.
You're right. I jumped the gun.
You jumped the gun. You jumped the gun
so
again.
Excited.
Fritz.
Can I at least play Faith, Blood, and Victory?
We'll get there. Come on. So, given that, they were doing things, there were people supporting these colonies in Mexico. Like I said before, they're very much tied to the old country, and they had a particularly the kind of anti-assimilationist politics, right? You're Mexican first, even though you're here, your country is Mexico.
I knew it. I was always saying that to my dumbass kids. You think they're your friend until there's a war with Mexico. Guess whose side they're going to be on.
I would like to ask somebody who knows better, like what they actually did think about, like the U.S. taking these territories from Mexico, and like people in the Rio Grande Valley, or like El Paso was one of their big centers.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
That's whatever. And those places have Spanish names for a reason. They went.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, even though they emphasized this Mexicanness, they did try to seek support of some like-minded individuals in the U.S. Mm-hmm. After all, if you're going to have a large membership in the U.S., you want to have some other non-Mexican supporters, especially since this is a period in time in the U.S. where the Catholic population is definitely increasing.
Yeah,
there's a lot of Catholics in the U.S.
Yeah, some tension
in the 30s
still,
and there's still some tension around that, right?
I mean, if it makes sense that like Father Coughlin was an ally.
Sure.
Yeah. Damn, yeah, you got it. I mean, from what I've seen, he did praise them a few times. Mm-hmm. Which again didn't look good when they were like, "We're not fascists."
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The most famous Catholic pro-fascist person in America was like, "Well, these guys are doing a great thing."
I think Coughlin even had a nice thing to say about the old gold shirts too.
Oh, I'm sure.
Back in the day.
Yeah. I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? I mean,
because he was like a Nazi.
Yeah.
I mean, he was also into social justice, right?
That's right. Well, he called his paper social justice. His movement was called social justice.
No, I mean, this is right. He probably looked at this and was like, damn, that's great.
Yeah, they're my guys.
Wish we had that in Detroit. Yeah. So the organization that they developed their strongest links with, and that would remain so for most of their, let's say most of their existence in the U.S., that's a little bit of a generalization, is the National Catholic Welfare Council.
Okay, yeah, this was a new one for me. Yeah.
Yeah, so these people were like their biggest advocates. And surprisingly powerful. Mm-hmm. Do you know anything?
Yeah, I when you pointed them out to me, I did a quick little read through of some of the CIA archives on them, and they have those, so that's number one. Mm-hmm. So I can tell you that I know more about their post World War II history at this moment, but like they were involved in that period in this insane thing called the Operation Pablo Pan, where I think the number was 8,000 Cuban children were like smuggled out of Cuba into the U.S. to be placed with like good Americanist parents or Catholic boarding schools, which sounds horribly dark to me. But that was some of their post-war stuff. I know that they started. So they formed, I think it was 1917, 1915, something like that, right on the eve of
children is what they were like.
Well, they didn't form to do that.
Yeah.
But this is Cold War, right?
And also it was saving children from the communists.
Parents.
Yeah. Well, yes. So they formed, I think, in like 1915, 1916, 17.
During World War I. They originally called the National Catholic War Council.
The War Council, that's right, yeah. And it seemed like early on their focus was about what the Catholic attitude for war should be. But the more significant thing was that this was the first time that all the American bishops had met in like 50 years, right? Mm-hmm. So when they formed this time, they just sort of stayed formed. And they became a power group really inside the Catholic Church, so much so that when the Vatican, I think it was Pius XI, actually, ironically, when he was dying and handing over the reins, they intervened to stop their own dissolution in the church and managed to do it by reaching up the chain of command all the way to the Vatican to halt any new pronouncements between the new popes or some shit like that. But what I'm saying is like they had a lot of power to move around inside the Catholic Church. And it seems like, from what little I know about them in this period, that was quite a threat to the Catholic Church because it was clear that these guys, you couldn't dissolve them, and they were throwing their weight around and making political connections and so people began to believe that they were the official voice of the Catholic Church in America, which is interesting. It wasn't
they kind
true.
of were, no?
They weren't. They weren't official.
Not official, but in an unofficial...
So basically, like all these big motherfuckers that ended up turning American Catholics into like straight up fascists. I mean, it wasn't just an American problem, but like were tied to this council. These like big names, Bishop Fulton Sheen, these kinds of guys, you know. So like,
his name came up.
Sure, yeah. So and these are also the guys that were like pushed, that were tight with like Kennedy's, that were getting tight with the guys that would eventually become the CIA, and then like following the war, they were a big part of Cold War intelligence networks, providing names to the La CIA, etc.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I was curious, and so I looked up like because of course when in the last arc we talked about what was going on in the U.S. with the Yugo immigrants during World War II. The FBI was investigating the Croatian Catholic Union.
Oh, okay.
And I was curious to see what these guys had to say about the Ustasha and stuff.
Yeah.
And they didn't really say much during the war. Not that I could find.
Sure.
But they did definitely later engage in a lot of like anti-Titoist propaganda, and especially around Stepinac. What's his name?
Stepinac.
Was it Archbishop?
Well,
what's the term?
It's some bishop. Yeah, maybe Archbishop.
Archbishop, I think. Stepinac.
Yeah.
Who was, of course, they said was being persecuted by the horrible communists, and there was proof.
Yeah. But the long and short of that guy's story is that he was like the Vatican's guy in charge of Croatia at the time, and like was therefore responsible for all the horrible shit that went on between the Ustasha and
even
the
though
Catholic
he
Church.
did, speak out apparently a few times against Ustasha atrocities.
All these guys,
I mean,
he saved some people.
All these guys have that story. Every last
Hitler
one of
saved
these,
someone.
Yes,
So
every last one of these motherfuckers has an "I saved some people" story.
I mean, Hitler saved, I think, a Jewish doctor.
Well, la-di-da.
Free holy.
I mean, Hitler saved a Jewish doctor. Yeah. He decided not to.
Yes.
He decided not to kill one.
Yeah.
Which is,
I think that's mostly what they're saying in these stories.
Yeah.
We decided not to just let some of them die because that really was on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. So of course, I mean, like we know where they kind of stand with that.
Sure.
Like, and especially a lot of the Catholic churches support tacit support.
Aloie Stepinac.
I call him
Aloysia.
Okay.
In English, it's Aloysius.
Right. Aloysius. Delicious.
By the way, the NCCC is now the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops.
That's fucking crazy. Yeah, that's really nuts. I know that they had to change their name also from like committee to Congress at some point for optics' sake.
There
I
were
don't
some
really get why.
splits too that happens.
Okay, so now they're the National Conference of Bishops. Yeah. That's a really big deal, and that's also been a thorn in the side of the Francis papacy as well. He's been trying to clear house over there. Yeah, there's a purge going on today. The National Catholic
you were just
War
talking about
Council.
You were hoping that the American Catholic Church splits off.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Which is what these guys were.
That's what we're gonna get.
We're pissed off about having, like, they are Nat Catholics.
Yeah,
literally, they're
Catholics.
national Catholics, but they were against like the Mexican state trying to form its own church that's not affiliated with the Vatican. Right? It's
a little
weird how
that was an option.
it was. Yeah,
Interesting.
I don't know if it actually happened or not. Somebody who knows more about Mexico can tell me this, but
no, the first people that
I know it was on the table.
No one's allowed to do that, but
the
the Americans right now. I think that's the
Maybe
argument.
they should have started like a Mexican Orthodox church.
It did have some like weird. I think it
Might
was.
be.
I don't know if it was autocephalous or not. It had one of those terms.
I mean, if you make a national Catholic church, that's basically an Orthodox church.
yeah,
I gotcha.
Or Anglicanism.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
not too far off.
Yeah. They were close with the Orthodox. Anglicans were.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, these are the guys who are their biggest advocates, and it's specifically some people in the NCCC. But then later on, when they start getting in hot water, like a lot of different bishops came out in their favor, and so even like when they're in like the worst times in terms of like their bad press and publicity, I dug up an article from 44. This is like when they're like collapsing in the US, and
All right.
from the Catholic Advance, which was a Catholic newspaper from Kansas City, I believe. I believe it was actually also the bishop from Kansas City who was one of their very big supporters. And so this is when they're being called the fifth column, literally by everyone, this is what the Catholic Advance says in June 16th, 1944.
Danger of red uprising is told by synarchists. Mexico recently passed through one of the most dangerous moments in her history, but the danger still continues, declares El Synarquista, organ of the synarchist movement. Winds of tragedy are blowing over Mexico, continues the periodical. Everything leads us to believe that the leftists are preparing, if they have not already prepared, to strike a decisive blow that will bring them in power over the nation with fire and sword.
Nice.
So the conclusion is we should do that or something like that, probably.
Yeah.
We're going to pray the rosary so hard they're going to nuke us.
I mean, it ends with saying that like the danger to all Catholics in Mexico is still alive and imminent and threatening.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this is when they're being dragged investigated by the U.S. government.
Yeah. And just look at Mexico today, one of the least Catholic countries on earth.
Yeah.
They ruined it.
Yeah, these guys are saying that there's going to be a red revolution immediately in Mexico.
Man, they want the coolest things to happen, or they don't want, rather. But they.
I mean, what actually cool happened is you got a bunch of like red Catholics.
Yeah. But the NCWC,
you mean the liberation theologists and all this? Yeah, exactly.
Revolutionary priests.
Yeah. And in fact, except like literally, I think as we covered back in the tradition, family, and property days, the general story there was that the normal clergy was pretty fine with most of that, depending on where you were. It was, but the leadership of the Catholic Church, the bishops, archbishops, those guys, with some few exceptions, were universally opposed to any kind of compromise between like indigenous expressions for equality and stuff like that and the hierarchy. But like there really was, it would have been pretty easy just to let that thing happen.
It's very similar to what we said about the Serbian Orthodox Church in the 30s.
Yeah.
With lots of ordinary priests being like anti-fascist, even communist. Exactly. And then the bishops being fascist.
Yeah. In the States as well.
In the States, but I think also in the old country as well to some degree. Although it is kind of a forgotten aspect. I mean, I think no one really is aware today that they were actually socialist and anti-fascist.
Except for that one. What's his name?
From the
the one that had the church, the cross and the red star together, and he was one of the first.
There is a
I can't remember his last name. But he was like one of the delegates at the Anti-Fascist Council of National Liberation stuff.
I just can't shake from my mind that Ray basically implied that the Anglican Church could also just be called English Orthodox.
I think they also thought that at some point. It was not.
It's really blown my mind.
Yeah, they had a close connection. And they were actually saying that. That's like from both sides. We're saying like basically
you can't unsee it once you see it.
Yeah. They also they had like a common like liturgies and things like that.
Wow.
There's like a whole movement of Anglican Orthodox friendship.
How about that?
Yeah.
Well, there could have been a whole Mexican Orthodox church in singing UMEX songs with with commie Orthodox priests, but
liberation theology, Mexican Orthodoxy.
Yeah, that's a topping I want on my ice cream.
But the National Catholic Welfare Council kind of had a longer history that kind of makes this make more sense with Mexico. So they're founded during World War I. That's also basically the same time as the Mexican Revolution, right? So they also played an important role for advocacy of Mexican Catholics during the Cristero Wars. Makes a lot of sense, right? They're Catholic bishops in the U.S. Right next door to them, Catholics are being persecuted by, secularism or whatever. So they have this kind of long-standing affinity towards the plight of Catholics in Mexico.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty natural combination, right? Also in Elstrand's text, he says that that they influenced the Synarchistas' emphasis on like hyper-nationalist anti-communism as being more attractive to like the authorities as like a good way of presenting yourself like that, as opposed to just being Catholic fanatics.
No, that's a winning combo.
It's a winning combo.
Hyper-nationalist anti-communism should get you a professorship at Harvard.
Yeah, and yet it didn't work out that way for these guys. and some guys from the NCWC tried to establish a relationship between the Synarchistas and the American Legion.
That again is the National Catholic Welfare Congress.
Yes, it's a lot to fucking say.
It is.
National Catholic.
Call them NatCath. NatCaths. The NatCaths Welcon.
That's even harder.
NatCath Welcon. How is it hard? NatCath Welcon.
I'll let you say it. I'll just look at you and then you can say it.
Yeah.
So ultimately their relationship with the Legion didn't really develop. But it's interesting that was on the table to begin with.
Yeah.
Because that also kind of makes a lot of sense. Maybe they weren't militant enough for the Legion, you know?
Well,
so that's the American
Legion.
Okay.
American Legion.
But then I think I was curious about this too, because the NatCath Welcon took apparently in opposition to World War I, which would have put them in opposition to the Legion as well, the American Legion as well, in the at the initial stages when they were the American Expeditionary Force. So I'm unclear about that relationship.
Right, but this is the 30s at this point.
Oh, fuck me. Then yeah.
So this is already
no, they should be well in line now. Yeah.
I guess it just didn't work out.
Okay.
And what about the Bund and things like that?
You know, I haven't seen any relationship to the Bunds. I don't think they particularly cared about those groups that much.
But they played fucking Tejano music, which is like German, Mexican, music together music.
But nor do I think, okay, so the Bund did have presence in California and in Texas, but not nearly the same as it did up in like the Northeast and the Midwest. So even though there were Synarchistas in Chicago, and that was a big Bund place as well. Same thing with like Detroit, Milwaukee.
Yeah.
Maybe they would just.
I wonder if they just couldn't really make a strong inroad in some of those shared communities of Germans.
It's a very different vibe. Like, can you imagine this music at the fucking Madison Square Garden rally?
No, it's for ice houses. That's what it's for. That's where you get like this norteño style and shit. But it's a missed opportunity,
Again, like I said, this subject is not super well studied.
Oh, yeah.
So there absolutely could be links. I'd be very curious to see whether there are. It wouldn't surprise me if there was a link, say, to Italians.
God, why not? This is like the time to do it.
Because there were plenty of Italian Catholic clergy and even, higher ups in the hierarchy, right?
Sure, yeah.
Like bishops and the like who were very, very sympathetic to Mussolini and fascism, right? I remember reading reports about churches in New Jersey that had like plaques to Mussolini out front.
In the late 30s, Mussolini also aligned himself with the Catholic Church.
Right. Well, of course. So. Yeah. And vice versa. Let's just say.
But that subject is not, like I said, studied enough. If you read some of the articles written about Synarchistas that are tying them to fascism, like European fascism specifically, they mention all kinds of interesting things that, like, for example, there were some of the people that helped found the movement in Mexico were Germans who were Nazis, according to some of these articles I read, like in newspapers from the time.
It's late enough that it's possible.
How true is that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But it certainly wouldn't surprise me.
But it's also kind of one of the things that, like, that was the primary concern of the FBI in the U.S. when Nazis were no longer the friends we had hoped they would be. A lot of the investigations that I'm looking into now in some of my research projects here on the show are like Nazis really trying to Freudian slip. The FBI really trying to figure out if this fascist is directly connected to some German intelligence agency or is getting direct money. There was an obsession of theirs. Right. So if you wanted to put the spotlight on an organization in that time, to claim somebody had a German connection would get the spotlight on them. So that's the possibility as well, that these claims were part of that attempt to eventually shut them down.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll get to that.
I sound like I'm on their side. I'm like defending them against
I feel you because the information is because the relationship isn't so clear, but it really should be, right? It seems like it should be, because when you take one look at them, with like their uniforms and even the flag red with a, white circle with green with Mexico inside of it looks kind of fashy. They had armbands. They had, the whole thing you would really expect that connection to be there. And yet, according to a lot of people that have studied this, that connection isn't as clear as you might think. Right. And that's the entire problem when talking about them. So it does kind of seem sometimes we'd be like, well, maybe they weren't. Who the fuck knows?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Maybe Nazis were not interested.
But I mean, like Father Coughlin did praise them. They did have to tone down anti-Semitism that they had when they started getting in trouble for being fascists because that was no longer cool.
I mean, Coughlin even had to do that. Exactly, they all had to like shut up at some point. Well, okay. So the
Nazis were not very interested in the Bund. So maybe like a Mexican fascists were even less.
But this was far larger than the Bund. Like, it wasn't as large in the U.S., but in Mexico itself, I could see why you would think of it as a legitimate fifth column, right? Because if those figures are correct, then it does seem like they had well over like 500,000 supporters at some point, and we're reaching kind of the peak of their membership pretty soon. But I did just want to give an honorable mention to a guy that cracked me up when talking about their contacts and supporters in the U.S. And that's from Elstrand's book, the Synarchista Gringo, Frank Gross.
Gross. Yeah.
Who was like a Catholic layman, I think some sort of business schmuck.
Catholic layman business schmuck. You don't get a lot of those
from Milwaukee.
Nice. Yes.
Who happened to be just a really big fan of the Synarchistas. He was really into that. I mean, he was a Catholic crazy person.
So like of German origin, probably. Huh?
Yeah, I'd imagine. Yeah. Because he was trying. So basically, there was a growing Mexican presence in Milwaukee, working in the various industries there, and he helped them. The German Catholic Church reach out to the Mexican community to help them, establish their own, church. And since he isn't Mexican, he couldn't really found a chapter, but he certainly tried his hardest.
So he's like their peg leg Joe Morgan.
Well, Peg Leg Joe Morgan was like a leader. I mean, Frank Gross wishes he could be Peg Leg Joe Morgan.
He was too much funny if this guy was a Yugo.
Yes.
Trying to be a Mexican fascist
everywhere.
Be like, number 3 is
exactly
the guy who stabbed.
His real name is Valich or something. Awesome.
Yeah,
let's look into it just in
Peg
case,
Leg
right?
Morgan, the guy who stabbed Derek Chauvin, and then.
Oh yes, yeah. You know what? This guy, it's such a fucking hipster move for this dude, because he can pick from anyone. But this is the late 30s, right?
Yeah.
There's so many options.
I mean, for sure, Bund was strong in Milwaukee,
but not super Catholic. I mean, I think the point that this guy is is into the whole Catholic thing.
Yeah, he was a hipster fascist hanging out in a fascist bar, and all the guys were Bundist, and he was like, I'm myself more into Mexican fascism.
That's right. That's what I was saying. Yes. He's got like a special stack of LPs that,
He's like, guys, have you ever heard of Synarchismo?
Yeah. One of those guys.
What now? So, I mean, even though he couldn't really get to start his own chapter, he remained a vocal supporter of theirs when they, he was an early supporter and stuck with them until the end. So like I said, time was not on their side. 37 is not the best time to start an organization. Just maybe even a couple years earlier, and you'd have a more established network that could deal with this kind of thing. But they start reaching their membership peak, I think both in Mexico, but definitely in the US in 1940 and 1941. Of course, 41 is a bad year for most of these emigre fascist groups or fascist groups in the US in general.
Yeah.
With a little something called the American entry into the war.
Yeah.
But up until then, they were doing pretty great. Like there were people that were not their biggest fans, and they were getting some bad press, and especially getting bad press from elements in like the both Mexican and Mexican American left.
Okay.
And labor. So I know that it's been mentioned that the Mexican Labor Federation, the CTM, was very much against them from the start, and were calling them Nazis from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And they had an English language publication too to help.
Great. That probably helped
push
a lot.
that out.
Yeah.
And then there's El Congreso de Pueblos de Habla Español, which is just El Congreso mostly called.
Nice.
In the U.S. that was also actively propagandizing against them. But again, like I said, they're still doing well up until 41, basically. New chapters are opening up, money's flowing in. 41's also when these colonization schemes start.
Okay.
Like things are looking pretty good. And of course, music is being made. As soon as I saw that, I was like, motherfucker, okay, I gotta look some shit up. So maybe we can take a quick little musical detour.
Let's do that after a short break.
Yeah, let's take a short break and get back.
I wanted to say one more thing because I think I'm going to forget it after, and I kind of want to hear your reaction. I would like us to maybe look into at some point also some of these groups that the Imperial Japanese government has sort of apportioned out for their propaganda efforts. And I feel like it feels like these guys would be a pretty good choice for that.
So if there is a direct connection, I haven't seen it, but there are other accusations regarding the Japanese too.
Oh, okay.
We'll get to that I think when we come back from the break.
After the break.
I have subpoenas for everyone in this room.
So I used to stick around for Spanish Mass back when I was a observant Catholic, in the sense that I observed that my parents were forcing me to go to church. But I used to stick around for the Spanish one because they would have the sweetbreads after and fresh tamales every time. Amazing. Fucking English one didn't have like tea and scones or anything, Nothing. Had nothing.
No fun.
Nothing.
All right, so let's take a little musical detour just because we have to.
Absolutely.
I can't not do a music episode.
I mean, this one, it's not possible.
It's not possible.
As soon as I saw that there was such a thing and that was not a small thing for them, I was like, okay.
No, but Ray's right. Like, imagine trying to be a fascist to this music.
I mean, but is it that different than like Fasci Tempertons?
Okay, we're gonna listen to it now.
Okay,
but I certainly feel like they managed to work in some Philip D'Souza into the mix,
okay. So for the march, let's start with the march, and that's their official anthem.
That's the faith, blood, and victory, huh?
Yes.
Alrighty. Yes.
Great, firm, and steady. Our faith encourages us. 1,000 steps forward, not a single one back. Heaven has promised it, and we have sworn it. We shall raise the patria or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Viva Mexico.
It's a little bit more fun, though, than the typical march. It's got the typical march, but it's very upbeat, no?
Well, I mean...
Father wasps. The best ones have fallen. The blood was the price of freedom. That's
this one.
Yeah. Martyrdom culture.
Yeah, I don't think you can dance to the horse vessel march or something.
Is that a challenge, Ray?
Again, the fallen ones in fighting positions. Long live. For God and for us, really.
I mean, you can drink to this,
Yeah. No, I mean, this is like party music.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, compared to most like fashion marches, absolutely.
All right.
Well,
it was weird that they added that in the end there.
we didn't stay for the Synarchismo Victoria.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. We can do without it. I mean, basically, the lyrics for most of these are what you might expect. Like even the titles, like "Por mi patria, mi Dios y bandera."
Yeah.
We love the fatherland, God, and
flag.
Flag.
Yes.
Flag.
Yes, flag. Flag, please.
Which one should we hear? So should we listen to the...
I can do that one. You want to do that one?
Yeah, because I think that's one of the more original ones, too,
Okay.
like from the 30s.
All right.
There's modern interpretation. There's modern Synarchist songs as well.
And this is for Dadland, God, and flag.
The quality's low, so we don't have to listen to the whole song. But it's a much more festive song.
Oh, yeah. It really is. I mean, I have to say, it's doing a good job of making me not afraid of fascism.
Yeah. Again, this is much more pleasant than, as you said, Horst Wessel-Lied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe they should make us more afraid, actually, because it's like more like I can see like a town square festival with this music.
Yeah,
It's not what you want.
You can just slip it in.
Yeah.
No one even notice. Yeah. All right.
Well, can you imagine sitting in a shack in the Sonoran Desert trying to build a colony and running out of water and still singing happily this?
But yes, I could. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also a bit melancholic, so yes.
It is, right? Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay, so now we should do Mañanitas Synarquistas, which anybody that's been to a Mexican birthday knows Las Mañanitas birthday song, and this is for some reason a Synarchist version, or fans of Yugo-Mex music will know this as Mama Juanita.
All right. Did I ever tell you guys about my first experience with a piñata?
No, please do.
It was also when I realized that I was some kind of a commie, some kind of pinko scum. I was at a birthday party in Florida, and
Did you organize the distribution?
I tried to organize the distribution. So the fucking candy fell on the ground, and I was like seeing it on the ground and thinking to myself, all right, we have to do a quick count here. Like there's like 12 kids here, everybody should probably get a certain amount. And then as I was doing that calculation, just fucking rush of
Got your ass
children,
beat by a bunch of
just like, oh my God, yes. Just like elbows thrown around. And like I remember looking up at one of the adults thinking like, hey, adults, like this is your job, right? Like step in here, do something about this. And they were basically like, quit being a pussy kid. I was like, oh, this is the world I was born into.
Snitching on the other kids.
I wasn't snitching. I was like, like let's not go after each other like animals. That's what they want. They want to see us fight each other.
Mm-hmm.
We could all get the candy together and use the sugar rush to cut off some fucking heads.
Yeah.
All right.
So here's Mañanitas Synarquistas. On this 23rd of May, in Mexico, in the fight, Synarchism is not my damage. Alert, my brothers now. Triumph of our mission. In the sides of Synarchism, sound the whole nation.
All right.
The sun is rising, and to the light the day has given us. Wake up, homeland of mine. Look what already dawned. And then, oh ho ho, ho ho.
Yep.
Right there.
Yeah.
Don't need a subtitle for that.
Nope.
That's universal. All right. Man, a lot of hits.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot.
Gotta say.
Well, they are fascists in that they steal other people's stuff. And
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm pretty good at that. Yeah. Rebranding.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, but they definitely have some like original hits, you know?
Okay.
Like,
there's
plenty on YouTube. I mean, the one that we started off the
Did they ever get to the
episode with?
Did they ever get to like the point of like reggaeton or anything like that? Do we have any?
Oh, I did see, although I didn't really listen to it. There's a Synarchista rap song. But
so it's still going on, huh?
There are still. I mean, it still exists as an organization. I think very small one. And judging by some comments on YouTube. There's some people that are still into it.
Well, there's a lot of like, I've noticed this recently. There's some
Mexican Hearts of Iron players.
Well, yeah, there's some like new kind of fascist YouTubers out there that are interested in some kind of hipster shit. It's out there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't think it'd be that even hipster shit in Mexico, though. I mean, it might be, but it's a thing that existed. So before we went on this musical interlude, we're at their peak membership in 1941, right? Where a lot of these groups start to meet their end. So like we said before, unlike the Bund, unlike the Italian fascists in America, or even von Siatsky.
Mm-hmm. Von Siatsky. Taking us back about a month.
Yep.
Crazy Russian fella.
Yep. And the Russian fascist compound in Connecticut.
Yeah. I forgot we did that guy. What a weird little elf that guy was. Yeah. Charmed life, that one. That was another one of those ones where we have like an unusual combination of fascist trends meeting in one person.
Yeah. Because in his case, it was mostly like a cosplay thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, even him, for whom was a cosplay thing, he did have connections to like actual like
killers.
Yeah, like actual fascists. Like in Europe, he tried to get an audience in Germany, but he had connections to like serious ass people that were involved in the coming war, or in the war that's currently happening.
But all you got to do is call yourself a count, apparently, or a duke or something.
Yeah, he was a count, right? Or he
said he was.
Count. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's
not hard to like impress people, because like American
circles love that shit. Because all the fucking, like we've been talking about this whole arc so far, like the entire ruling class was down with the fash for like until like the mid to late 30s, more or less.
Yeah. And I mean, people still call Evola a baron.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
And he comes from like, I don't know, his parents, I think, were something like accountants or something like that.
Okay, yeah. Well, counts.
Yeah.
So yeah, the connection to like the warring European powers, right now in 1941 with the Synarchistas is not super, super duper clear.
Okay.
Nevertheless, they are being labeled a fifth column.
Yeah.
And this is, and probably, again, like I said at the beginning of the episode, probably with good reason. Just because they didn't have a militia doesn't mean that if, push came to shove, they'd be perfectly fine with, whoever taking over.
Sure.
But you mentioned before the interlude also whether there was a connection to the Japanese, what's it called? The something Union of the Pacific. I can't remember.
Yeah, we haven't really done our deep work into that yet. We've been focusing more on the European connection, really. But
yeah. There were a lot of accusations that, for example, that they would have sympathies to the Japanese, and that some of the colonies they were establishing on Baja California, on the Pacific coast, could potentially be a security threat. Japanese submarines could get into those harbors and, refuel, restock, this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was part of the concern for, what was happening or what could potentially happen. Also brought up there's a Japanese guy that owns a ranch that's near one of their colonies. So for to give you an example of how the media was talking about Synarchists in general, not just in the US, here's an article from September of 1941. Fifth column is still working in Mexico. Synarchismo movement here is danger to hemisphere defense.
Mm-hmm.
It would be nice to say that all fifth column operations in Mexico have been liquidated, but it wouldn't be true. 2 years ago, I found here a flourishing and frightening fifth column movement with a system of levying upon persons of German descent so that a constant Nazi war chest was available. Fear of reprisals against relatives in Germany was created. The money flowed as a result.
Wait, they were like shaking down Germans?
I mean, who the fuck knows?
Are we sure this isn't like a scam?
Yeah.
Yeah. It says the movement here is called Synarchismo. It claims to be a religious and educational had to have religious and educational objectives. It is red hot for Mexican nationalism. It appeals to youth and to labor. They're saying that it's the Nazis are directly funding them in that,
Okay.
Despite Mexico being on the side of the anti-Axis coalition. But then the biggest factors in the public turning against them would be a couple things that we've talked about, or one at least that we've talked about before, and that's the Zoot Suit riots in 43.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Joe Pegleg Morgan's story is tied up in that.
It is, but it's also kind of the major, essentially race riot in LA, not essentially, it was a race riot in LA, that, increased the level of xenophobia against, like Mexicans in America. Yeah. And of course, this isn't like an unusual thing. It wasn't like an outlying event. Yeah. To remember that the entire 30s was, defined by the Mexican repatriation, which is like the deportation of hundreds of thousands of people, including many American-born people to Mexico. So the Zoot Suit riots and the Sleepy Lagoon murder in 42 were like, two major events that had, white America thinking that Spanish speakers in general in the U.S. weren't loyal to the war efforts. And then this became tied into a theory that criminality and these kinds of potentially subversive activities are directly financed and are a plot by the Synarchists.
That's a complex jump there.
Yeah, then in order to undermine the support in Spanish-speaking populations in the U.S., because they generalize everybody.
Sure.
This.
Of course.
Not just like Mexicans, Chicanos, whatever. It's everybody. That they might not be loyal, and that's because the Synarchists are deliberately
like poisoning their minds,
starting gangs and
interesting,
causing trouble.
That's such a.
Now this is where I say, okay, that seems like that's bullshit.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's got that. I mean, it's like a take on outside agitation. It's got a lot of hallmarks of that almost vaguely what's structurally anti-Semitic kind of logic to it. Of the secret force behind class disruption. But
what's interesting is that some of these theories are also coming from the left too, of like the like Mexican American left too. They also latched onto that.
Okay.
And they were also promoting early on, like I said, the idea that that Synarchists are a fifth column in the U.S. And it's interesting. I don't know. When I was reading about this, I couldn't help compare it to the Slavic American Congress.
Yeah, sure.
Which is kind of a similar thing. This is that brief window in the U.S. where these leftist immigrant groups have like an ear in the government and in the media, right? And are able to say, hey, these people are like reactionaries. You should beware of them, this, that, and the other thing. But in the case of the Synarchists, it actually picks up a lot, right? Because of these events that get tied into a more general xenophobic feeling against like Chicanos and Mexicans that didn't exist with like Croats.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because, Slavic American Congress is also saying stuff like, hey, you have a bunch of, Ustashas. And, the FBI shut down a couple newspapers, detained a few people, investigated some stuff, but they didn't get nearly the same amount of press.
Sure.
It didn't have nearly the same kinds of consequences as it did for the Synarchists, right?
Yeah, interesting. That's episode 132, by the way, people. Episode 132.
There you go.
Start of arc 3, I think, or 4, or whatever.
Episode 3 of
what arc is this?
Whatever, the last arc. So, I mean, there were like nationally syndicated pieces all like throughout American newspapers talking about, the fifth column elements. So like Baltimore Sun, July 1943, New Mexicanism reported reaching into California. Synarchism now counts 50,000 loyal adherents in that state, according to observers.
Okay.
And, again, it's saying they claim to be peaceful means, but they
are
may
Mexicans.
be a big factor. Now, again, this is like I said at the top of the episode, when I saw this figure, when I first started looking into this 50,000, I was like, damn. It turns out in some of the FBI investigations into them that they found that by 43, when this is being written, there may be 700 members nationwide, not 50,000 in California.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's obviously probably down from the height in 40, 41 by 43 because the damage had been done. Nevertheless,
so a lot was put on these guys, it sounds like. I mean, like they really, they were, I guess, the right people for some reason to take a lot of the, I don't know, the attention for rising fascism in that area, even though they didn't really have the numbers.
And if they did have the numbers, they didn't have the same kind of bravado as, say, the Bund or whatever.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Nor were they particularly interested in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But their concern was that they'll destabilize Mexico, and then Mexico will go Axis and whatnot, which could be a legitimate concern. But again, it's fueled by this xenophobia that comes about from the Zoot Suit riots and from the like media hysteria about the Sleepy Lagoon murder. So it's, during this time, during like from 41 to 45, they still have the I forgot what
it's the Nat Cath Wellcon.
They still have the Nat Cath Wellcon on their side for at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And to like a major extent, like they were even organizing like tours, speaking tours at like universities and trying to, dispel the bad rumors about Synarchists.
That's interesting. These just to say that this is not the only like fascist group that the Nat Cath Wellcon is going to be connected to. They're also tied to papers like The Awakening, I think it was called. There's a lot of linkages that they're going to have through their long history. There's going to be an American Council of Bishops episode at some point here.
There's going to have to be, yeah.
Wow. We got there.
But even they have to drop them by the end of the as like official kind of support.
Okay.
You do still get some bishops, like I said, like when I read that article from the Catholic Advance or whatever, that's from 44. That's way past when a lot of them were supporting them still.
Okay.
But there were still guys in the Catholic Church that were about it. Just majority of it looked bad for the, NCWC.
Yeah.
In general.
Yeah. It's a fine line. You can have some sympathy with them. If you're already a reactionary Catholic, you are a fascist. So you can imagine how hard it must have been for them to pretend not to be. We can show a little sympathy for that. That'd be tough, Right. Imagine being a reactionary Catholic and trying to explain to somebody how you're different from a fascist. What would you even say?
I mean, I know what they would say.
What?
Well, they would say, we're not into biological racism.
There you go. You're right. Yes, of course.
And they did say that, right? They said, we're not racist.
Yeah. Where's the fucking air horn gone? I haven't had that one out in a while. I think it's going to be this one. That's the regular one. There we go.
Yeah, they were saying that's not us. We're not racist. We have no affiliation to this. We're not even anti-Semites anymore. But then again, who do you believe? Because in some of these articles, you're saying, well, okay, yeah, they say that, but in Mexico, they're screening Nazi movies and, their events and stuff like that.
Yes.
It's really hard to say. I'm leaning more towards, yes, they were, potentially
Yeah.
Supportive of the other side. Right?
Sure, yeah.
Or almost certainly were. But were, feeling that the heat was on. Because, at this point, the California Un-American Activities Committee is investigating everyone involved with this. It's not looking good. And the U.S. government is blocking the newspapers published in Mexico from coming into the country. So effectively, they've done a considerable amount of damage just in that way as well, which is, kind of the downside of having a highly hierarchical group like that, right? That takes the marching orders.
Yeah.
And, reads newspapers published from a centralized place. It makes it kind of hard.
Like we've been saying this to all sorts of people for a lot of our lives. It's just a dumb way to organize.
I mean, it's fine that they didn't have that idea because it hurt them. And and I can't say I like them very much. So.
Yeah, but the music.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this was a blow that they didn't really recover from, even though obviously once the war ends, focus of all the different un-American activities, investigations go on to communism, and these guys are militant anti-communists, so you'd think that they were fine.
Yeah, free pass.
But they were kind of tainted at that point, and their support dwindled a lot in the U.S. And then in Mexico, I mean, to make a long story short, by the 50s, it started to fracture.
Okay.
And there were like several different, I think at least 3 major factions that came out of the original Synarchist movement that had kind of varying degrees of either militancy or wanting or being more open to cooperating with the state.
Okay.
Again.
Okay. In the U.S. or are you talking about Mexico?
In Mexico. Okay. In the U.S., I think the damage had been pretty much done. And Elstrom says that even like even in the 60s, there were still guys calling themselves Synarchists, but the networks, the like branches of the party were gone.
Well, I guess that makes a lot of sense because
severely diminished.
Because I mean, there's also there's less of a reason to be that guy then. There's less of a reason to have a Catholic fascist organization during the Cold War because the entire machinery of the Catholic Church was dedicated to anti-communism and yeah,
but you'd think that would make them an even stronger force.
But it also makes them kind of both pointless and also too on the nose,
Yeah, but if you think about
because we're doing anti-communist monarchism as American democracy right now, and you guys are doing it as what we tried in the 30s.
Yeah, and the Mexican government did, I think in the 50s also ban the Communist Party on combating extremism and stuff.
Right.
But that being said, the Synarchists didn't have the benefit of having the CIA basically support them like all the other fascist emigre groups
close,
that came.
Though I mean, why not? Because they had the Nat Cath Wellcomes, and they were CIA tied. In fact, they were also, by the way, one of the co-founders of the John Birch Societies. Was Nat Cath Wellcome.
Right.
So I mean, they were right there with them. You know what I mean? It's just what kept them from crossing over. And
I'm surprised that they did. I mean, if it's true that they didn't, I don't know. Focus more on their connections or similarities with the Franco regime post-war.
Yeah.
Because Franco survived the Second World War and was a very important ally of NATO as an anti-communist regime, which was also very Catholic.
Right. Yeah.
So
I mean, the accusation that they were that their sympathies were actually phalangists and that they were basically an arm of Franco in Latin America was one that was leveled against them pretty consistently, and seems to make a lot of sense. I mean, they seem to be more similar to Franco than they are to pretty much anybody else.
Yeah, except they have this strange name that's more connected, I think, to the history of French fascism somehow.
Right, because they had the Synarchists as well, which I think emerged at a similar time.
Yeah.
And there, I did see some newspaper article from back in the 40s that was trying to link the two. But I'm not sure if there is a link there at all.
Yeah.
Well, same name.
I grew up in a strong Catholic home where Jesus was the center of our life.
This is what I was actually hoping to play, but I missed it. Shit. So
if you read like OSS reports about them from 44,
nice.
which I did, they say even in 44 that they're in crisis, that like it's pretty much going down. They whether or not they're anti-American is questionable because they say that they're not, but then there's like anti-Protestant stuff, and Protestantism is American. So yeah, I mean it's game over for them. And again, when I compare it, because I couldn't help thinking about the Slavic American Congress, and then just the Croatian Catholic Union, which were more or less the same as these motherfuckers.
Yeah.
And they just get investigated. I found a couple articles in mainstream newspapers that were, those Slavic American Congress people being like, yeah, take down the Ustanovas, or like, oh, like Chetniks are collaborators and should be banned in America.
Right.
And yet it
didn't blow up like this.
It didn't blow up
like
like
this.
This
was a big story.
at all.
Yeah.
Not nearly. Like it's hard to, downplay just how much media attention this did get. Like if you go into some of those like archives of like newspaper archives,
so like Synarchist terror was,
or just type in like Synarchism, you'll get a shit ton of stuff. I mean, it was really a lot of attention.
Okay. Shit. Well, also then, okay. I mean, we already mentioned that there might be some sort of racism at play in some of that, but probably the biggest problem is that Mexico wasn't communist enough for them to be, for people to look the other way.
Right.
Like the situation wasn't so bad that we could let you guys get away with being as horrible as you might want to be.
But it is funny that like, so the little paragraph that I opened the episode with, where it's like, in Mexico, more so than Argentina and Bolivia, which, written in 44,
right.
This is like where the hotbed of fascism is.
Yeah.
And, the OSS is saying this organization's falling apart.
Right.
And, 2 years later, like Eichmann and Pavelic,
exactly.
like running around Argentina and Bolivia and, wherever.
Maybe I'm just a little tired and been smoking La Mota and drinking mezcal here, but it's got like a limited hangout vibe, that story, doesn't it? I mean, like, here, let me give you some fascists that you want, But let's not talk about Eichmann for a minute. Is that cool? Can we just talk about these Mexican guys?
Or the people running the OSS.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess what I'm most curious about, and that I haven't really seen, is what their relationship was to some of these other organizations in the U.S.
Yeah.
Beyond like the Catholic groups and the like, whether there was, at some local chapter cooperation with the Italians or with the Bund or whoever, because that to me would really solidify cement a more kind of concrete fascist relationship. Yeah.
I imagine that at that moment, it might have been even okay, because like the 30s, these more traditionalistic fasci Cathy types are already trying to act like they're cool with Irish people taking a lead in the movement in America on that front. This might have been a bridge too far for them.
Yeah.
We're barely okay with the gingers. Spicy enough for me.
Indeed. Well, on that note,
all right.
It's getting late here.
Yeah, it's getting late. Yeah. Ooh, it is getting late. Okay. Well, then, guys, what else is there to say? But next week on our
again,
Patreon,
we are continuing with a bit different fascist themes.
Really? Yeah.
This is the
Lawrence Dennis Part 2
theme of this month. Yeah.
We got a twofer, actually. Lawrence Dennis Part 2, and we're continuing the story of eugenics, I believe, next week.
Yeah.
So it should be a good one.
So there will be some of the same fascists that we used to.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, not Lawrence Dennis.
No, I'm the
eugenics for sure.
Yeah.
All
right. Standard ones.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe play us out with some Umix.
Yeah. All right. Well, here we go.
Pod kiszą tichą mre jeden grad. Se u sivu maglu I teški oblak uvilo sam. nikog nema da prođe barem da čuje par. Samo na uglu stoji sad jedna senka večita sam.